In this day and age, we've had so many found footage horror movies that it's kind of hard to tell a lot of them apart. The one that most people would probably agree pioneered the genre, so to speak, was the Blair Witch Project back in the late 90s. But today, I'm here to talk about two infamous films released in the early 2010s, the Grave Encounters movies. On the surface, the premise of the film seems pretty simple. A bunch of people trapped in an abandoned mental asylum, but once you dig into them, is there more to uncover? Well, let's immerse ourselves in the horror and find out. The first Grave Encounters film starts with a movie producer named Jerry Hartfield, played by Ben Wilkinson, who tells us that the following film is 100% legitimate, explaining that the context behind said footage is that a crew was filming a reality TV show called Grave Encounters and went missing while filming their 6th episode inside the Collingwood Mental Asylum. The show follows a group of paranormal investigators, led by Lance Preston, played by Sean Rogerson, and revolves around the crew going to different haunted locations and going into lockdown for a night. No surprise here, the show is 100% faked. Collingwood seems like prime material for them due to the history of lobotomies and unsanitary conditions in the building, but once their lockdown begins, they soon find that not only have they bitten off more than they could chew, but they also discover that the hospital's previous inhabitants are still there and less than pleasant. On top of that, the hospital keeps shifting around and seems to bend the very fabric of space and time, trapping them inside at nighttime and starting a daring escape attempt for the crew as they film their fright fest through the corridors, desperate for a way out. The concept of a haunted hospital is nothing new, and in fact, it's probably one of the most cliché horror settings you could think of, so Grave Encounters already has a bit of an uphill battle to fight in regards to trying to be interesting. The story takes a bit of a meta approach, acting as if the whole show was real at some point and that the footage we're seeing is 100% authentic. This is a part of the storytelling that would be focused on even more in the sequel, but I'll talk about that later. The important thing I want to focus on is whether or not the actors portray believable people, and for the most part, they do. The beginning of the story does a great job portraying the background of most ghost shows and how a lot of them are bullshit, to be frank, and the fact that they're genuinely frightened when something actually supernatural occurs is a nice touch. Acting is pretty solid for the most part, although it does do that one thing I hate in found footage movies, where there always has to be people saying fuck, fuck, fuck every 5 seconds when shit hits the fan. And one of the characters named TC, played by Merwin Mondesir, I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong, really got on my nerves because once the tension in the film picks up, he never stops cursing. I get that in a stressful situation you want to let out some anxiety, but not every third word out of your mouth needs to be 4 letters long, if you know what I mean. Other than that, pretty much everyone does a good job. The special effects are acceptable, and the night vision of the cameras adds a spooky atmosphere to most of the scenes that feature it. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the night vision cameras would eventually help inspiring the mechanics for Outlast, which was released just a few years later. I'd say the biggest problem I have with Grave Encounters is that most of the horror aspects of the movie rely on jump scares, which I could almost forgive, given that every time something pops out, it is actually a threat and not just some stupid false scare. But even then, I didn't find this film to be all that scary, which is saying something considering I hate hospitals. I feel like if they had tried to build a more threatening atmosphere and showed the ghosts more than just when showing off a jump scare, that it could have been a lot creepier. But instead, most of the time our protagonists just run away from everything and we don't get to see much of the ghosts after that. Speaking of protagonists, Lance Preston is one unlikable douchebag, and it makes it kind of hard to root for him at times when he just yells at everyone a lot. It honestly irritates me sometimes that Lance cares more about capturing the supernatural on camera than he does his own crew. Yeah, it really makes me want to work with them. Despite my flaws with it, Grave Encounters is still a really solid found footage film, and the ending even ends on a cliffhanger, which we would eventually see followed up a mere year later in 2012 with Grave Encounters 2. This movie takes the meta approach to storytelling in the original movie and takes it up all the way, as the plot follows a film student and critic on YouTube named Alex Wright, played by Richard Harmon, who thinks The Grave Encounters is a load of crap and that it's a terrible movie. Shortly after he reviews the film, he gets an email from somebody which contains a small video of one of the actors from the first movie still inside the asylum going nuts. The user keeps messaging him with clues of sorts, including the coordinates to the building where Grave Encounters was filmed, which prompts him to investigate the movie and actors further, including Hartfield. Finally, he decides to bring his friends to Collingwood and try to figure out the mystery, while at the same time gathering footage of his own for a horror film that he wants to produce for his class. Grave Encounters 2's approach to storytelling interested me right off the bat, and I instantly wanted to see where the film would go in regards to new scares and characters. The setting of Collingwood is just as creepy as before, and the sound design and ghosts are good, but the special effects can be questionable at times. Overall, though, still looks good. I was also surprised with the amount of violence this film has compared to the first. I mean, it goes straight into slasher territory at times. I still like the night vision camera moments, and overall the horror is a solid aspect. Unfortunately, The biggest problem that I have with Grave Encounters 2 is that the first half is so disconnected from the second. Whereas the first film had a consistent tone and picked up rather quickly, it feels like Grave Encounters 2 is trying to be a comedy/mystery for the first half and horror for the second, but it fails at making you laugh 75% of the time. It takes a while to even get to Collingwood in the first place, and in the meantime, there's just a lot of scenes of characters filming themselves around campus, driving places, talking to people, and it just gets so stale. The characters are no longer the film crew you could have had some respect for, and are now just typical horror movie college students you want to see die. By the way, if you thought Lance was an unlikable protagonist, then wait till you get a load of Alex, because in my opinion, he's 10 times worse. I thought he would land right on par with Lance in terms of being douchey, but a decision he makes near the end of the film completely made me lose any sympathy for him. I also noticed that the acting is, for some reason, way worse, and some of the faces that the characters make are just laughable, like this one. What the hell is this face? For as much as I gripe about it though, Grave Encounters 2 is still an enjoyable movie when you actually get inside Collingwood, and it goes into more of the background surrounding the asylum and the horrific acts that took place there. I wouldn't recommend seeing it as a standalone movie, however. My recommendation would be to pick up both of the films and do a double feature, as you can pretty much go right into the second film from the first, and the meta storytelling is unique to say the least. Ultimately, I do recommend that you see these films. And hey, as far as found footage movies go, you can sure do a lot worse. With that being said, this has been Mr. Mix Media for Spooky Sightings, signing off.